Okay, this is a continuation of Chapter 1, which is going to be very short and sweet, and we're going to go ahead and attach Chapter 2 to this same video. So that's why it's labeled Chapter 2, even though we are finishing up Chapter 1. Okay, we left off with this last one. Retrain employees who complete tasks incorrectly. And this is again part of the manager's job. Okay, so we need to make sure that we're following procedures and monitor everybody while they're working. We don't want them to stray too far. We all get lazy, and that's just part of it. That's where the retraining comes in. Now, the agencies responsible for preventing foodborne illness are in this order, okay? Food and Drug Administration, which is the FDA, inspects all food except meat, poultry, and eggs, regulates food transported across state lines, and provides technical support and training, and issues the food code. The only slightly confusing thing about this is that you're going to see that the USDA actually does that, but it's under the direction of the FDA, okay? So don't forget about, they come up on the next slide. The FDA Food Code provides recommendations for food safety regulations. They're created for city, county, state, and tribal agencies, and it is recommendation, not law. So when you run into a question about, do you have to adopt the food code? That answer is no, you do not have to adopt the food code. But what happens is when you want to send your stuff to another state, especially stuff you have manufactured, and you are an agricultural state, like, you know, apples and oranges. Florida is water, sugarcane, and oranges. Can you imagine us not being able to send anything to another state? California, the northern states would run into trouble with apples. I mean, agriculture is big, and you want to be able to trade freely. So all 50 states adopt it, but what they do is they make a Chapter 5K or some kind of exception, and they integrate it into the food code. And they're allowed to do that as long as what they are proposing meets or exceeds the FDA guidelines. The U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA, regulates and inspects meat, poultry, and eggs, regulates food transported across state lines, regulates food involving more than one state. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, that's the CDC. What they do is they compile data. That's really all they do. All of the inspections are done by the USDA. And under the USDA, you have your individual inspectors, state by state. State and local regulatory authorities write or adopt codes regulating retail and food service operation. Codes may be different from the FDA Food Code. Food safety responsibilities include inspecting operations, enforcing regulations, investigating complaints and illnesses, and issuing licenses and permits. Okay? This is the big thing right here. And that's all done on a state level. We will be back with Chapter 2. Okay, here we go with Chapter 2. And we are going to watch the training videos that go along with Chapter 2, and I believe it's 3 as well. But they're all tied in together, so don't panic about that. Let's just go to our DVD. So hold on just a second. And here we go.
open all hours. Any given day, hundreds upon hundreds of people come through our doors. Whether they're here only briefly or stick around longer, it always seems just as busy at the start of my shift as it is at the end of it. We've got a great reputation, but in this business, location is practically everything. Unfortunately, our business always seems to be booming. I see a lot of very sick people, but every time we get a patient suffering from a foodborne illness, I have to admit that it strikes close to home. That's because for years, home was my family's restaurant. I grew up in that place, and I worked in it since I was a teenager. I waitressed, washed dishes, managed, you name it. All that pasta, veal, and chicken my parents cooked, and I served, put me through medical school. It's still there downtown, and it hasn't changed a bit. Seems like I was always on my feet back then, and I still am. So I think that all my medical training and my experience working and managing the restaurant more than qualifies me to talk about foodborne illness and its prevention. But in order for you to really understand foodborne illnesses, here's what you need to know. There's the 4 types of pathogenic microorganisms that can contaminate food and cause illness. Then there's the different conditions that affect the growth of these harmful foodborne microorganisms. You've also got to know and understand the different types of food that support the growth of pathogens. Then there's bacteria, viruses, parasites, and fungi, and the different types of biological, chemical, and physical contaminants. And you have to learn about food allergies. So where do you start? In order to really understand foodborne illnesses, you first need to learn about the microorganisms that cause them. And the first step towards preventing foodborne illness outbreaks in your establishment means that you also have to know about all the conditions that allow the microorganisms to grow. Microorganisms are small. They can only be seen with a microscope. Some are perfectly harmless, but some can spoil food. We call them spoilage microorganisms. Then there's others which can cause illness, and these are called pathogens. Pathogens absolutely have the potential to cause illness when they're consumed. And what makes pathogens even more dangerous than spoilage microorganisms is that, unlike food that's spoiled, food contaminated with pathogens may not look, smell, or taste any different from uncontaminated food. Eating food contaminated with foodborne pathogens or their toxins, which is just another word for poisons, is the leading cause of foodborne illness. Okay, there are 4 types of microorganisms that can contaminate food and cause foodborne illness: bacteria, viruses, parasites, and fungi. And there are 6 conditions that support the growth of these harmful foodborne microorganisms. With the exception of viruses, you can remember these 6 conditions if you use the acronym FAT-TOM. Those initials stand for food, acidity, temperature, time, oxygen, and moisture. Let's take a look at the first condition, the food itself. Just like people, foodborne pathogens need nutrients to grow. They typically need carbohydrates and proteins. You can find these in food like meat, poultry, dairy products, cooked rice, pasta, and eggs. The second condition needed for microorganisms to grow is a proper level of acidity. Pathogens grow best in food that contains little or no acid. Now, the next condition on the list is temperature. Foodborne pathogens grow well on food that's between the temperatures of 41 and 135 degrees Fahrenheit, 5 and 57 Celsius. We call this the temperature danger zone. Food has got to be handled very carefully when it's thawed, cooked, cooled, and reheated. That's because when you're doing any of these things, it could be exposed to the temperature danger zone. Time is another important determining factor in the growth of foodborne pathogens. Under the right conditions, pathogens are capable of doubling their population every 20 minutes. If certain food remains in the temperature danger zone for 4 hours or longer, foodborne pathogens can grow to levels high enough to make someone sick. Oxygen is another factor. Some foodborne pathogens require oxygen to grow, while others grow without any oxygen. Large quantities of improperly hot-held foods, such as soups, stews, and sautéed vegetables, have been associated with certain types of bacteria that grow without oxygen. Now, moisture is the last condition you need to consider. Foodborne pathogens require moisture to grow. I want to underscore just how important all this Fat Tom information is. Just last week, I had a patient admitted through emergency. Young woman in her teens. She was experiencing severe nausea and vomiting. She was also running a fever and complained of severe abdominal cramping and diarrhea. Now, this may not sound like a world-class emergency to you, but when I asked her how she felt at the time, she told me she felt like she was dying, and she was very afraid. Later that evening, another case came through, an elderly man with his wife. Same symptoms. He was also suffering from dehydration. He couldn't even stand up. This looked like a foodborne illness to me, so I took some samples for testing and put the patients into supportive care. Long story short, we got all the test results back, and it was salmonellosis. I notified the local health department, and they got an investigation rolling. Within days, they turned up 18 similar cases at 5 other local hospitals and clinics. The investigation revealed that all the affected patients ate at the same buffet here in town, and they all had the chicken salad. It turns out that the cook didn't check the final internal temperature of the chicken, leading the investigators to believe that the chicken was undercooked. This allowed the salmonella to survive the cooking process. Then matters were made worse by improperly cooling it at room temperature after cooking. This created ideal conditions for the salmonella bacteria to multiply in the food. All the patients recovered, including those that were hospitalized, but it was tough for all of them. They were here for a week, and that's a long time to feel miserable. So now you see why everyone needs to take Fat Tom very seriously. You have to control the conditions that support the growth of these harmful foodborne microorganisms, and do it all the time. Any type of food can become contaminated, but some are better able to support the rapid growth of pathogenic microorganisms than others. These items are called TCS food because they require time and temperature control for safety. Not only do they have a history of being involved in foodborne illness outbreaks, but they also have a natural potential for contamination due to the way they're grown, produced, or processed. TCS food includes milk and milk products, eggs, except those treated to eliminate salmonella, shellfish and crustaceans, fish, baked potatoes, sliced melons and cut tomatoes, synthetic ingredients such as textured soy protein in meat alternatives, meat, including beef, pork, and lamb, poultry, raw sprouts and sprout seeds, heat-treated plant food such as cooked rice, beans, and vegetables, tofu or other soy protein, and untreated garlic and oil mixtures. There's another group of food that requires special measures to keep it safe, and this is ready-to-eat food. By that I mean food that's edible without any further washing or cooking. Ready-to-eat food includes washed, whole, or cut fruit and vegetables, deli meats, bakery items, sugars, spices and seasonings, salad, sandwiches, and properly cooked food. Remember that Fat Tom is the key to controlling the growth of pathogenic microorganisms. When you control these conditions, you can help keep food safe. Now, while it can be difficult to control acidity, moisture, and oxygen in an establishment, there are 2 important conditions for growth that you can control: time and temperature. Remember, microorganisms grow well at temperatures between 41 degrees Fahrenheit and 135 degrees Fahrenheit, 5 and 57 Celsius. So, to control growth, it's important to keep food out of this temperature range by cooking it to, or keeping it at, the proper temperature.
Okay, we will be back in just a minute with the remainder of the video and chapter.